Dear friends, English literature, Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, Macbeth by William Shakespeare, brief questions and answers. Brief questions 106 to 148. Question 106. What is Lady Macbeth's prayer to the spirits after she learns Duncan is coming? And so she wants to be filled with cruelty, given a hard heart and the thick blood necessary to do what has to be done in order to make Macbeth king. Question 107. To beguile the time, look like the time. Who says this? What is meant here? And so Lady Macbeth says this to her husband here. It is meant that in order to deceive the people, Macbeth should look as they expect him to look. Question 108. To beguile the time, look like the time. What does the word time here mean? Here, answer here, time means the present age or the people of the time, or man and things generally. Question 109. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Who says this and to whom? And so Lady Macbeth says this to her husband. Question 110. What are Macbeth's argument to himself against killing Duncan? And so Macbeth thinks that Duncan is a good king and a virtuous man. He has done no particular evil. He also thinks that Duncan is a popular king, and his death would bring sorrow and unrest in Scotland. Question 111. Now, how does Lady Macbeth try to convince Macbeth to commit murder? As Lady Macbeth tries to convince him by telling him not to be coward. She even says that if he had made the promise to do this, that she would have killed her own baby to carry forth with her promise. Question 112. What is Lady Macbeth's plan? And so Lady Macbeth's plan is to drag the king's groom's guards, and her husband will then go into the king's room and murder him in his sleep. Question 113. With whom does King Duncan arrive at Macbeth's castle? And so King Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle in the company of his sons, Malcolm and Donaville, and a few of his noblemen, Banquo, Lennox, Macduff, Ross, and Angus. Question 114. What motivates Macbeth to take the evil path he chooses? And so Macbeth is motivated by the idea of glory. He is also motivated by his dominating wife, who pushes him to pursue a higher title than the one that he possesses, because of his love for her and her desire to please her, as well as fulfilling his deeper, darker desire. He takes steps that lead him down a darker path. Question 115. What influence do the witches have on Macbeth? And so the witches tell Macbeth that he can obtain what he desires. They tell him of a reality that his darkest self wishes to possess. They appeal and fool the repressed desires of a loyal, faithful man and introduce him to another life. Question 116. How does Lady Macbeth overcome her husband's resistance to the idea of killing King Duncan? And so Lady Macbeth uses manipulation and persuades her husband that he should fulfill a promise that he made to her. She tells him of the perfect opportunity that has presented itself and then proceeds to tell her husband the upside rather than focusing on the dark, treacherous side. Question 117. Shakespeare has created a variety of short scenes that cut back and forth. What is his purpose in doing this? And so Shakespeare has made the scenes cut back and forth so that he can instill a feeling of urgency, tension, and anxiety in the audience. Question 118. Why does the King Duncan come to Macbeth's castle? And so the King Duncan comes to Macbeth's castle to be the new Thane of Cawdor's guest and to congratulate Macbeth over dinner. Question 119. What is a purveyor? And so a purveyor is an officer sent in advance to arrange supplies of food for the main party, which is to follow. Question 120. How sure is Lady Macbeth that their plot will succeed? And so Lady Macbeth is so sure that she doesn't even consider the fact that they could fail. Question 121. What does the word sewer mean? Answer. The word sewer refers to the head waiter. Originally, this word meant a person who tested each dish to demonstrate that there is no poison in it. Question 122. There is husbandry in heaven. The candles are all out. Who is the speaker? What do candles refer to here? Answer. Banku is the speaker. Here, candles refer to the stars. Question 123. There is husbandry in heaven. The candles are all out. What is meant here? Answer. Here it is meant that there are no stars shining in the sky. Question 124. What does Duncan give Lady Macbeth as a gift? Answer. King Duncan gives Lady Macbeth a precious diamond as a gift. Question 125. What does Macbeth ask Banquo at the beginning of Act 2? Answer. At the beginning of the Act 2, Macbeth asks Banquo to support him in fulfilling the prophecies. Question 126. What is Macbeth's lie to Banquo about the witches' predictions? Answer. Macbeth says he doesn't even think about them. Question 127. What is Macbeth doing in his soliloquy? Answer. Macbeth in his soliloquy is trying to convince himself that he is doing the right thing. Question 128. Who was Hecate? Answer. Hecate was the goddess of magic and witchcraft. Question 129. Who was Tarquin? Answer. Tarquin was Sextus Tarquinius, who raped Lucretia, the wife of a Roman prince. On the following day, she stabbed herself to death in the presence of her father and her husband. Question 130. On what pretext does Lady Macbeth refuse to kill Duncan? Answer. Lady Macbeth refused to kill Duncan on the pretext that he looked like her father sleeping there. Question 131. How will Lady Macbeth warn her husband to let him know that she has taken care of the girls, that is grooms? Answer. Lady Macbeth will warn her husband by ringing a bell. Question 132. I have done the deed. Who says this? What deed has he done? Answer. Macbeth says this to his wife. He has done the deed of murdering King Duncan. Question 133. Why won't Macbeth take the daggers back to the scene of the crime? Answer. As Macbeth can't bear to look at Duncan again, he won't take the dagger back to the scene of the crime. Question 134. What does bother Lady Macbeth? Answer. Macbeth's mistake of not placing the dagger with the girl's brothers, Lady Macbeth. With the girl's bothers Lady Macbeth. Question 135. What does Macbeth do with the daggers after the murder? Answer. After Macbeth has murdered King Duncan, he takes the daggers to his wife instead of placing them with the girls. Question 136. What does Lady Macbeth do when her husband takes the daggers to his wife instead of placing them with the girls? As Lady Macbeth herself places the daggers with the girls. Question 137. What does the death of Duncan symbolize? As his death symbolizes the destruction of an order in Scotland that can be restored only when Duncan's line, if the person of Malcolm once more occupies the throne. Question 138. What does the escape of Flens symbolize for Macbeth? I repeat it. What does the escape of Flens symbolize for Macbeth? And so the escape of Flens represents a possible threat to Macbeth, for the prophecy regarding Banquo's children leading a line of kings could still be fulfilled. Moreover, Flens's escape brings about the initiation of Macbeth's decline. That is, as this is the first time he has failed in executing his plans to perfection. Question 139. How guilty does Macbeth feel after committing the murder? Answer. After committing the murder, Macbeth felt so guilty that he couldn't even say Amen to a prayer. Question 140. What is Lady Macbeth's advice to her husband when he is unable to say Amen? Answer. Lady Macbeth advises her husband not to think about it so much, or it will make him crazy. Question 141. Why does Macbeth say he has murdered sleep? Answer. After killing Duncan, Macbeth feels that he will no longer be able to sleep at night, knowing that he is guilty. So he says he has murdered sleep. Question 142. What does Lady Macbeth tell her husband to do when he does not sleep? Answer. When her husband does not sleep, she tells him to wash his filthy witness from his hands. In other words, she urges him to get cleaned off and forget about it. Question 143. Why is the porter's speech considered to be comic relief? Answer. The porter's speech is considered to be comic relief because he alters the mood from horror. Question 144. What is the purpose of the porter scene? Answer. The purpose of the porter scene is to bring a change of tone into the play. After the dark tone of the previous scenes, this scene introduced good-natured comedy. Nevertheless, the jokes made also comment on the play's theme. Question 145. What does the Duncan Porter imagine he is doing in top response to knocking at the door? Answer. The Duncan Porter imagines that he is opening the gates of hell. Question 146. How do the Porter's comments on the people arriving at Hellgate mirror Macbeth's dilemma? Answer. The Porter's comments on the people arriving at Hellgate mirror Macbeth's dilemma because the people entering hell are liars and thieves. Question 147. Who are knocking at the door at the gate? Answer. Macduff and Lennox are knocking at the gate. Question 148. Who are Macduff and Lennox knocking? Why are Macduff and Lennox knocking at the door? Answer. Macduff and Lennox are knocking at the door of the castle because they need to tell the king something. Thank you friends for watching my video.